But just a quick recap. So hopefully anybody who attended 2 weeks ago, I sent Bernie back a fact sheet. So just to summarize what we spoke about, I know it's a 40-minute or 45-minute presentation with some questions after it, but I just sent out a quick fact sheet so that just to put that information together. What I speak about in each of my episodes, if you like, or each webinar, is it's not mutually exclusive. So it all feeds into each other. You're building a really good picture together, and you're taking information from each of the webinars to build that employer of choice concept. So just a very quick recap. I'm just going to try share my what I sent out to Bernie. So hopefully this will pop up in a few seconds. This is just a fact sheet about the last presentation. So management development, we spoke a lot about clearly understanding the changing role within your business, understanding where you are within that triangle, understanding where everybody else is. And that's fundamental to being a good employer, because we're going to speak today about employment basics, and one of the critical things in employment is knowing where you want your employee to fit in. So you can only know that if you have a very clear understanding of what this triangle looks like in your own business. We then spoke about the movement away from skill set in terms of dairy and in terms of cows and system, and more towards people. So we see a big shift as you're moving up the organization, whether it's you as the owner and employer, or your managers within the business, people, talent within the business that you want to move into a management role. There's a big shift away from the actual skills towards people, and that's a skill that you need to acquire, and it's a skill you need to facilitate for the learning of for your staff. So we just spoke a few things there about within that you've got personal and interpersonal. So there are some of the things that you can look at. Again, everything here is available on the internet. You can do university degrees on it. There's many positive psychology, popular psychology books that you can read that will really bolster your information that you've already been given. So this is an ongoing journey, and a lot of it, of course, is about reflection as well for yourself, that self-awareness. What am I doing? What could I do better? So that will keep coming through each of our webinars. And then we looked at interpersonal skills. So we see down here things like leadership, management, influence, communication. I'm going to build that picture through the weeks as well. So hopefully 2 weeks ago is a good foundation for what we're going to speak about, and I will refer at different points to what we've already discussed. So just moving on then, as in terms of the agenda, we're going to look at why employ. So hopefully that's popped up there with the time delay. This why employ. It's really, really important you understand what you're buying and what it is that you want from your employee. From there, we'll move on to employment stages. We're going to think about what it is that you can control, and there's a huge amount of controllable. And then we're going to look at timely selection and role clarity. So as I mentioned at the beginning, if you're very good and you put a lot of work and effort into this area, you are going to troubleshoot a lot of different things that could come up later on down the line. And a lot of people, when I'm speaking, ask me, you know, I know what you're talking about, but I just can't, I can't see what you're talking about. I don't understand what the idea is behind what you're trying to say. So one of the things that we did last summer in Moore Park, so in the Dairy Research Centre in Ireland, they had their open day, and we put together something. We wanted this to create a visual representation of employment. So hopefully what everybody sees is a rather dramatic representation of employment. Everybody knows the childhood game of snakes and ladders. It's a game of chance. You spit on the dice and desperately hope you'll roll a 6, so you can roll another 6, and it's all about chance. What we did here was we loaded the snakes and ladders board. So it's very much loaded. If you take a look at this, you'll realize that if you climb the ladders, you will avoid the snakes. If you fall down the snakes, it's because you didn't climb the ladders. So it's really a visual representation of employment. And as you can see here, before employment, many of the snakes come back to this bottom section here. So down here is employment basics, what we're looking at today. There are many of the things that you can do here that will prevent problems further up. So one of the biggest snake here is abusing employees' trust and goodwill. That comes right back down to the bottom, and that's not delivering on your promise. You know, that's holding people longer than you said you would. It's not paying them on time. It's not having correct facilities when maybe you said you should, or they come to you with an expectation of what it would be like to work safely in a dairy environment, and you renege on those, or you just don't bother for whatever reason. So there are many things that we can do at this lower stage in the game that's going to prevent some of these issues coming up later on. So if you think of it as snakes and ladders, don't leave it, but a loaded game. So do not leave employment to chance. You would not take a cow off the side of the road integrate her into your herd with your fingers crossed and hope for the best. You would very carefully think about what is the genetic profile I'm bringing into my herd? What's the herd security, the health security of the herd that cows come from? You're putting time and effort into that, and it's the exact same thing with employment. So employment basics is really, really important that you spend time and effort on it. It's very controllable. It's the kind of tick box exercises. It's very much that management aspect rather than leadership. So leadership is more about the vision of where you want the business to go and what kind of employees you would need in the future. Whereas management is the day-to-day running, and bringing people into your business in the first place is about the day-to-day running of your business. So that just gives you a visual representation of what employment looks like. Put a lot of work into the lower phases of the game so that you're preempting and you're preventing, you're troubleshooting future problems. And we're going to speak about how to do that today. So as we move back to our presentation, and again, there's a little bit of a time delay, but hopefully that comes up. We're going to discuss those timely selection and role clarity. So moving on, let's have a look at why. Now, this is you can see at the bottom, it's a reference to Simon Sinek, Start With Why. It's a very well-known book. It's one of the biggest sellers in the last 10 years. Simon Sinek does one of the most viewed TEDx talks about Start With Why. And the idea behind this is if you very clearly understand what your why is, everything else will fall in place. Now, in dairy, we know what you do. What you do is milking the cows, but why are you doing it? Well, often it's for succession. It's to keep the farm, it's legacy. It's to keep up being a dairy farming family. It could be to create a standard of living for yourself. But every time you're approaching somebody, having a clear understanding of your why makes it much easier to have resolve during tough times. So when you know why you're doing something, it makes it much easier to do it. And we see this permeating through a lot of books about sport, about highly effective businesses, talking about core values, core understanding, never losing sight of the core idea. That's very much the why. Unfortunately, I speak with a lot of highly effective businesses and they can't articulate their why. Now, when you get to good businesses that can articulate their why, they go into stellar performance. They quite quickly veer off into a different trajectory because they're very clear about what they're trying to achieve. That would be the premise of the book, Good to Great, if anybody's read it, by Jim Collins. There's a clear understanding of what we're trying to achieve. Because we know why we exist, we're able to clearly define how and what. So knowing your why, and I'll explain it a little bit better now, excuse me, knowing your why keeps you focused when you lose your resolve about the decisions you've made. So it's being able to step back and say, well, hold on a minute, why are we doing this? What's the reason behind it? And when we see businesses losing their way, they've often lost sight of the core principle of what they're trying to achieve. So why employ? So if we take employment as an aspect of your business that you need to get to the bottom of, well, actually, there's a lot of reasons why people employ. It could be to add time to the roster. Okay, so creating capacity. I mentioned in May that employing somebody is fundamentally buying time. At its most basic, when you're employing somebody, you are buying extra time. So you're adding time to the roster. Now, if that's what you buy, you should make good use of that. So what are you getting from your employee? If you're buying time, you make sure that time is planned. You make sure you've got long-term planning, that your staff come to work knowing what it is they have to achieve because you've bought that asset. You've bought the resource of their time. It could be to allow a change of focus, and that goes straight back to 2 weeks ago when we talked about the triangles and you're changing focus. You want to move away from milking the cows and you want to move to working on the business. So if you're buying the possibility for a change of focus, make sure that you are using your staff effectively to allow you to have that change of focus. So if you've brought in staff to milk cows, let them milk the cows. You shouldn't find yourself out there doing that work if you have staff available to you so that you can focus on something else. So that's the change of focus. It could be as simple as liberating personal time so that you spend more time with your family. Maybe you don't want to be chained to the farm all the time. You want to go on holidays. You want a bit of capacity to be outside the farm gate. Personal time. It could be to create opportunity. So we know that highly effective businesses, they have the right people before they expand. So rather than getting a new farm unit and going, oh gosh, I now have to retrofit somebody, saying I've got a really good person who's capable of running a new unit on their own, I'll find the opportunity for them because I already have the personal asset there. So that's creating opportunity. It could be that you are employing somebody to acquire a skill set. So they've got expertise in an area that will be typical of the accountant, it will be typical of the vet. Anybody who's got expertise, you are buying that. You should make sure you're utilizing and maximizing what you bought. And then, you know, in smaller scale businesses, can quite often, you see this typically in Ireland, and as you know, I'm from Irish dairy background, for company. It could be just being fed up and you just want somebody there around maybe for health and safety. You don't want to be on the farm and you're working on your own, so you've got somebody else there. When you know what your why is, it's going to make it much easier to be strict about your what when we come back down through that circle. So you want to do any one of those things or several of those things. Well, how are you going to do it? How are you going to achieve any of those? You're going to be an employer. So we're looking at being an employer of choice. So you're being an employer. We will look later on, a couple of slides down, we're going to look at why would you be employed. And if you can align a why of the employer with the why of the employee, you get a really strong working relationship where it's a symbiotic relationship, it's win-win. Your whys are aligned, you're able to give to your employee what they want, and they're able to give to you as an employer what you want. You get a really strong working relationship. So we look at why somebody might be employed, for example, a few slides in a few moments. So your strategy to be able to achieve any or all or one of the above objectives is to be an employer. And what are you going to do as an employer? Well, what are the tactics? So there's also a really excellent book by Alistair Campbell, who was a spin doctor for Tony Blair, UK Prime Minister. And he actually speaks quite a lot about Australia in it and talks about the resilience of Australia as a nation. But he doesn't talk about why, how, and what. He talks about objective, strategy, and tactics. So you will see different versions of the same thing. As long as you can clearly get to what your core existence is or what your core need for your employee is, that's going to make it much easier for you to manage your business. So your tactics in terms of being an employer, excuse me, and this is critical when we're talking about being an employer of choice, you're going to have in-depth business awareness. So it's not about grabbing a fella for a bit of work. It's about very clearly knowing what skill you need, where you're going to place them, and how you're going to facilitate them to do their job to the best of their capacity. So that's creating role clarity. Lack of role clarity in the workplace is one of the leading, if not the leading cause of employee dissatisfaction. So creating role clarity can only happen if you have in-depth business awareness. We then look at things, very manageable things like compliance, having structures in place, processes, facilities in place. So structures would be around how is the business communicating, what is the structure, who reports to who, who's accountable to who, what information is shared where. That would be looking at the organizational structure, having good processes in place. So, you know, have you got your standard operating procedures in place? All of those things that, again, are very controllable and things that you can walk away today and work on. Then timing is critical. So this idea, we'll talk about that more in depth at the end of this talk. So timing is really important because timing is about bringing somebody in and giving them the best opportunity to perform as well as they can. Now, every single person who moves through your business is a brand ambassador for your business. Never underestimate that. You don't know what the vet says about your business to the next business. You don't know what the lorry driver for your milk says to the next business. And they are, you know, what you want them to do is to go away and say, yeah, that's a good business, that's a well set up business, and speak positively about it. So you need to make sure, and we come back to this all the time when we're looking at an employer of choice, you cannot control what's said outside your gate, so all you can control is the best possible experience inside your gate. And critical to that with employees is timing. So timing is about hiring them at the right time of the year where you're in a position to facilitate them, where you're patient, you're tolerant, you're able to take them on properly, you're not giving them a baptism of fire. You've got a good induction process where you're explaining things to them, and not just about, one of the things we find even in blue chip companies is there's a very good induction process around how we integrate people in terms of the mechanics of the business. This is when we start, this is when we finish, etc. But they're not very good at the communication and the people aspect. So it's also about saying, this is John, this is who you report to, you see him once a week, you'll see him every day, you'll have a 5-minute meeting in the morning. Actually saying how this is who you impact, this is who you'll work with, this is who you need to learn skills from. You're actually inducting them from a people perspective as well, giving them appropriate training and the appropriate support that they need. So all of that is about timing. And if you are under pressure and hiring at the last minute, you're already dramatically on the back foot in terms of timing. And then we've got personal development, communication, and engagement. And that's, if we were to reflect back on the Snakes and Ladders board, that's that top section of the board where you are creating that ongoing engagement and personal development. Communication, of course, happens throughout the system from the day you say to the market, I need somebody to work for me, you are communicating. So communicating is a huge one, but it's ongoing. And we tend to, in any business, we tend to say, oh, well, I've got somebody here now, I don't need to make the effort. You do, because people's motivations change. So communication is ongoing. So it's very much similar to the triangles. Where's your position? What do you want to achieve in terms of your work role? What do you want your employees to achieve? How do they fit into your system? Why have an employee in the first place? And if you can clearly articulate how and why everybody fits into your system, you're going to make it much easier to manage them. And when we look at the next day, we will look at accountability, one of the most challenging aspects of leadership in any business, because we don't naturally like confrontation. We will find that when you're clear with your why, it makes it much easier to hold people accountable. If you're vague about what you're trying to achieve, it's very difficult to hold people accountable and you feel a bit guilty about it. But when you know what you're protecting, when you know what your business objective is, it's much easier to hold people accountable when they don't comply. So moving on from that slide, there's quite a lot of information. I would encourage all of you to, start with why any of that information, look at it there's a huge abundance of information around it, because we do know that a clear understanding of why, our core principle, that bullseye in the middle of the board, we do know that that is a driving force behind the highest and most effective performing businesses. So as the slide moves forward, we're looking at this idea of employment. Again, this reflects also on the Snakes and Ladders board. So we see, get that base right on the pyramid and you can grow a very large pyramid. You can build a very large pyramid just by having employment basics right. And it is extraordinary how people allow their system to fall down on employment basics. So not delivering on promise. And when you look at the whole thing, that's controllable. We've got those arrows out the side there. That is controllable. You can get all of that in place. Shame on you if you don't get that in place, because you can. It's something you can totally control. First impressions will be dramatically based on what you have in place prior to somebody coming into your business. Now, first impressions, of course, is fickle, because human nature will take what would I call it? Our prehistoric brain makes the first impression, so it's not a rational judgment, it's an emotional judgment. But as long as you have a lot of this in place, you're prompting that first impression to be good, to be positive. And then we've got that ongoing relationship. And what we find with employers of choice is that they're constantly moving around this circle, because you're always bringing people in. So you might have an ongoing relationship with one person, but you're right back down here making sure everything is still in place, still in order, still correct. So when you bring in new employees, they're coming into a good system. You're not neglecting your incumbent employees. You're continuously working on this triangle. So it's not a case of I've got to the top now, I can sit on my laurels and do absolutely nothing. It's that ongoing continuous movement in terms of employment, because motivations change, your business is changing, you're changing. So your ability to manage people changes, and that's going to all come through in the employment relationship. So it's very important to think about getting what you can control right in order to make that higher pyramid, in order to build a good structure, the base of that, making it as robust as possible to ensure that you're giving a good first impression where, if at all possible, and that you have the discipline to continue working on it and not go, oh, thank God, I've got an employee now, I don't have to think about it again. You have to continuously break the system, because in reality, there's any number of reasons why somebody might leave you, and they could be non-work related reasons. So you have to have a system that is continuously working and facilitating the idea that you're going to always have a movement of employees. It's frustrating when you do the work and you think to yourself, hold on a minute, I'm a good employer, I'm doing well here. Why can't I just keep my employees? Why am I always on this wheel? That is the fact of life. And if you can't accept that, you're going to really struggle with employment, because people are going to change, they're going to move through your business. But also that is the really enjoyable aspect of employment, because you're being exposed to different types of people, you're learning, you're creating different relationships. If you're being conscious about the brand ambassador concept, they are selling you as a good employer to future employees, and creating a good reputation for you. Again, this comes back to role clarity. So if you have a lot of movement through your business, and that's just the market, so maybe you've got backpackers, you've got holiday people coming over to Australia and just want to spend a few months, being very clear about your business so that you're slotting those people into the right place and not expecting them to be, you know, top notch unit managers by the end of their 3-month stint, but actually saying realistically, this person is only staying here for 3 months. I'll put this amount of work into them. I'll put them into this section of my business. I'll make sure that in those 3 months, they have a great experience of dairy and of my business, because they're going to report on that through social media, to their friends, everybody else, and they're going to continue that opportunity for more employees to come in. But so what we would say to everybody is, in the current and future employment market, you have to have a tolerance for high turnover with an ambition for longevity. So you have a tolerance for people moving through your business, but you're working every day to create a good experience so that there is the chance that in every X number of people passing through your business, one will stay with you. And I'd love to say, you know, along with this presentation, there's a free employee for everybody in the audience. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. There's no silver bullet. But one of the things I would particularly find about farmers is they have, I'm reading at the moment a book by Angela Duckworth called Grit. And farmers have grit because, you know, you've worked hard all your life. So this is just a new phase. When you're in that big employment phase, that's the new section of your business. And you have to put the same effort into having staff that you did creating the business in the first place. But there is a change in mindset because you're moving away from the skill of farming and the technical aspect of farming to the technical aspect of managing people. So one of the things here that's important is that Dairy Australia have, of course, their own employment resources that you can get at the peopleindairy.org.au. You know, there is the physical folder available to you that many of you will have. If you don't, speak to your local DA extension officers or request it from the People in Dairy website. So the resources are there. Look them up, educate yourself, inform yourself, give yourself every opportunity to create that, to fulfill the promise by getting things right in the first place. And that's really what it's about. So you're creating that structure that allows you to fulfill on your promise, because you are giving everybody who comes through your business a very good experience. And we see a lot of change in the research now about the psychological contract. So of course you've got your legal contract. This is how many hours you'll be working. This is what you will be paid. And somebody puts their name to that. So you've got the legal contract, but there's also the notion of a psychological contract. And when somebody comes to work for you, they expect certain standards. They expect that they'll be paid on time. They expect that they'll be treated respectfully. They expect to potentially learn on the job, not necessarily, but they will have certain expectations that mightn't be clearly articulated in the work contract and the legal contract, but if you break them, you'll pretty quickly lose your employees. And what we find on farming, because your businesses, regardless of your financial turnover, your small businesses in terms of the numbers of employees you have. So realistically, if you're struggling to keep employees, it's more likely down to simple relationship concepts rather than they don't like cows or they don't like the farm. It'll probably be down to something like they don't feel respected, or, you know, actually during the week I was sent an email by a farming couple that I know, and they said they wanted to do an appraisal. They didn't actually want to do an appraisal. They desperately wanted to hang on to good staff. So they had misinterpreted what the appraisal was. But really, you know, one of the best questions you can ask your staff is, what's your deal breaker? What's the one thing I could do to you today that would make you walk out the door? And it's very rarely around money. It's usually things like speaking down to me, disrespecting me, not letting me home on time when you said you would. It's a lot of those kind of things that you can actually control. And the thing is, if you know what somebody's deal breaker is, you can work every day to make sure you don't break it. So you can really use that information to understand what somebody is doing. And that comes back to communication and just asking the question. Of course, you can't do that if there isn't time in the system. If you're last minute hiring, you don't have time to have those conversations that allow you to reflect and say, okay, well, I'll make sure that my language is good, that I manage any type of bullying or intimidation that's happening in the business, and that I make sure everybody has a good experience. So timely selection, that really leads me into that. Timely selection is very much about you get what you want versus take what you're given. So if I wait till the last minute, I have to take what I'm given because I'm desperate. I'm already desperate. I'm already on the back foot. Now, let's walk through that very simply. My business is already stressed. I bring in somebody at the last minute. They're unlikely to be the person I wanted. They're just the person that's available. The first thing I do, which is the worst possible thing, the very first thing I do, even before I speak to that person once they come into the business, is I stop looking. You know, I thank God, I say, brilliant, I've got somebody now, I can get on with what I'm trying to achieve, and I stop looking. And that's really dangerous, because what you've done there is you've settled for somebody, not for the right person. So we need to have timely selection, that you are bringing the right people in at the right time and that they're having a good experience. So when you are an employer of choice, you are waiting, you are timely, you are looking for the right person. You're not just taking the first person that walks through your gate and with a big sigh of relief saying, thank God I've got somebody. You're very strategically picking the people that are going to make the best impact on your business. And what you're given, of course, you know, the likelihood of actually getting the person you want is so limited. And then they're not going to be, maybe they don't have just even on top of that, you're already stressed. So you can imagine that conversation. So when you're trying to teach them something and they don't pick it up after a grunt, you're quite put out and, oh, here, just give it to me. And you've straight away diminished that person by telling them, basically saying to them, you're not competent, you're not capable, and I don't trust you. So timing is everything when we look at getting what you want versus what you're given. So you should always, this is about protecting your business. You should always get the person that you look towards getting the person you want. Now that's going to come with tolerances, of course, and we'll talk about that in a moment, and role clarity. So when we look at business security versus business exposure, this is my point about protecting your business. You know, business security, you're exposing your business when you take somebody you don't want. You're exposing your business when your selection isn't timely and you're just, you know, grabbing anybody that's available to you because you don't have time to look into their background. You don't have time, you know, to check their references. You're just taking what you can get, and that's really dangerous for your business. And let's think about this. For the majority of you, you are working where you live. You should not be exposing your home, your business to, you know, somebody who is not right for your business. And if you think about it, the stress you bring back into your home, back to your family, because you have the wrong person in the business, that is totally your fault. And believe me, the people around you know that. So it's really about securing your business and coming back to that why. Why am I employing somebody? What is it I'm trying, when I'm buying their services, what am I actually buying? Am I buying skill set? Am I buying the opportunity for me to do different things? What am I buying? So never expose your business to unnecessary risk. Employing somebody is controllable. Now, I know there are probably several of you shaking your head and going, not in this tight market. If there's a tight market, you just have to be more imaginative and think more, and it may take longer to find the right person, but it is better to wait longer to find the right person than to take a short-term hit on the wrong person, because the day you take in the wrong person, you are punishing everybody, yourself included. So it's very important you have the courage to hang on. Just back on that one, I was speaking at a group in Scotland last year, and one particular guy said, you know, I really should get rid of somebody who's working in my business. And it was an ongoing course. And when he came back the next time, he said there was a palpable sigh of relief from everybody in the business, because that person shouldn't have been there. The person didn't even want to be there. They were just stuck in that rut and continued to work there. They were happy to be let go. Everybody else was happy to be let go. So it's really about understanding that the day you take the wrong person, you're punishing a lot of people and actually rewarding that person because they shouldn't be there in the first place. So looking at large recruitment pool versus a narrow selection. Now, if you are going for a timely selection, you can look at a lot of different people. You've got the opportunity to see who's out there, to investigate, to see what opportunities there are. You can reconsider what the role looks like. You can look at alternatives. Whereas if you are going as last minute hiring, then it's a very narrow selection. You've got to take what you're given. And again, that comes straight back to taking what you're given rather than what you want. So the timely selection means you have the opportunity to look around and to really get the best person, to challenge your own assumptions about who the right person is, to allow employees or to allow people to give you the chance to convince you that they're the right person for the job. So you've got a lot of things working in favor to get a better person if you're timely in your selection. Patience versus intolerance is huge. So this is really about you and the unit manager and anybody else who's in your business. If you've got somebody coming in with plenty of time to spare, so you need them to be up to date with calving, you bring them in advance, you're able to explain things and go through with them, as opposed to what I hear a lot, unfortunately, in the UK and Ireland is I bring them in spring calving, say it's spring block calving, for example, I bring them in and, you know, it's a real baptism of fire. It either makes them or breaks them. I see what they're made of. I put them in at the deep end to see how, you know, if they're worth anything. That's unethical. You know, that is totally immoral. It is cruel to set somebody up to fail. And it's not a baptism of fire. It doesn't prove worth. What it does is damage your reputation dramatically as an employer. You know, recklessly throwing somebody in. And you've also done this. You've dramatically exposed your business at one of the most significant times of your year. So it's so foolhardy to think that you can throw somebody in the baptism of fire. So you are going to be a lot more patient if you have time and space in the system, if you're not last minute hiring, versus this crazy intolerance where you're taking jobs from people, you're not developing them, you're not engaging with them, you're not communicating in them, because quite frankly, you don't have time. So time is about allowing you to, you can be very patient when you've plenty of time. You will be extremely intolerant. You'll go into you're cognitively impaired when you're under stress. So you get into very narrow, you go for shortcuts. Shortcuts when you're managing people is either shouting at them or going silent and taking the job from them. And that is really damaging to your reputation, because unlike the cow, a person can go outside your gate and just say what a terrible person you are to work for. So it's very important that you're mindful of what's being said outside your gate. We also have this idea of embedding learning. So under pressure, we know this from military training, the psychology of military training, we know that under pressure, we revert to what's normal. And what you want to do is you want to embed good practice, good learning prior to a stressed period. So you want people to do the right thing. So when they're under pressure, so think of, you know, your kids are playing footy or they're doing some sport, they're putting in hours and hours of training so they do the right thing under pressure when they're in the match. That's why we train. That's why we practice, because we want to embed, we want the brain to embed behavior. So under pressure, when we're cognitively impaired with a narrow focus, we automatically do the right thing because we wired our brain to do that. And that's what embedding learning is. If you understand that there are stress times of your year, that is not the time to teach people. That is not the time to educate people on how to run your business. You need to embed good practice prior to stressed periods. So it's looking at your calendar, it's looking at the planner. We've got a picture of it here. It's an exercise I did as a session for Bernie in May. It's spotting gaps. Where's a good place to bring in employees? So where in my calendar, this is a spring block system in Ireland. We've got a lot of white coming on in these months here. So anytime from August, September, October, November, December onwards, that's the time I would bring staff in to make sure that they're reasonably competent when it comes to calving. Now, of course, if they're coming in here, they haven't done calving before, if they've no prior experience, but you're engaging with them, you're talking to them, you're telling them what it looks like, you're sharing videos, you're showing them the shed system, you're giving them time to get their head in gear for that very stressed time that is critical to your business. So it's very important that we think about embedding learning prior to stress periods rather than just that baptism of fire where you go, well, you know, they'll sink or swim, we'll just throw them in at the deep end. That's a very, very tough way to run your business. Plus, it creates huge frustration for everybody around you as well as yourself. And also, we need to think about coming back to that basis of the pyramid. It's about having systems in place. It's going at your farm and saying, what could I do better? It's looking at health and safety. It's looking at your facilities rather than retrofitting. You know, get those things right now, because that's going to make a good impression to your staff. And it's one thing that you've ticked off on your box as well. So having systems in place, timely selection, saying, well, if I've got new staff coming in, I need to make sure that there are facilities available for them, and not have them, you know, perching at the edge of a table because there isn't enough room for them, or they end up eating lunch in their car because we don't have staff canteen. It's really thinking about, and actually that's not just about facilities, that's also about having standard operating procedures in place. It's about having things clearly marked and making it as easy as possible for people to slot into a clearly defined system. Dairy is not a complicated system. It might be difficult to hear that, but it is not a complicated system. You are fundamentally extracting milk from a cow. That's the absolute premise of dairy. So it's making that as streamlined as possible so whoever comes into your business is able to do that. And when we talk about role clarity, which is coming up now, you know, standard operating procedures, realistically, if you've got a clean system that you haven't put a lot of noise and disruption and carried on redundant habits, in theory, I know you wouldn't do this because you're not going to expose your business in that way, but in theory, somebody should be able to walk off the street or walk off the side of the road or walk out of the bush and be able to run your business. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for that really streamlined, clean system that allows employees to come in and feel that they can engage and get the most out of themselves straight away. So looking at this idea of role clarity, it is just, I'm sure I've only a few minutes here, but what I do want to do here is we started off and we talked about why would you employ? Well, let's align that and look at it from the employee's side. Excuse me, the employee's side. So the employee, for role clarity, they have a certain agenda when they come into your business. And the better you are at getting hold of that agenda and understanding where somebody's coming from, you can work with them from that perspective. So if somebody comes in and you think, thank God I've got somebody, and a couple of weeks down the line they go, oh, by the way, did I tell you I'm only a backpacker, so I'm only here for 3 months. Now all of a sudden you resent them, rather than getting clarity from the beginning and finding out. So really understanding, why might somebody want to be employed? Well, they want to maintain a standard of living. They want to fund a passion. My industry says that that's the holy grail, and people sell a huge amount of training packages so that your staff have fulfillment. That comes down the line. You can't expect somebody to come into your business and to be fulfilled straight away. You have to give them security. You have to make them feel welcome. You have to train them properly. You have to build that opportunity for them. They will not enter your business thinking, this is it now, I'm going to be amazing. They are coming into your business for other reasons. You have to create a system that allows them to feel fulfilled. And yes, that sounds frustrating, but again, we come back to noblesse oblige. You have as the employer, you have got all of the privilege, so you have to do some of the work if you expect other people to get involved in that. So this idea of, it could be simply that they're filling time or that they're doing it for company. And you would understand that about your employee and understand where to slot them in. So if you've got somebody who's just passing through your business and they're going to do a bit of work for you, well, then you're managing them and creating role clarity in that way. You're not all of a sudden saying, here, I'll stick you into the unit manager's office and expect you to run three units, totally paralyzing them into inaction. And we will talk about the learning cycle as we move through the series. So it's understanding, if you can get a hold of what your employee wants from your business, you're in a position to respond accordingly. And that's creating alignment between the employee's why and the employer's why. So how are they going to do it? They're going to be employed. What are their tactics? They're going to show up on time. They're going to be present. They've got focused application and contribution. Now, when we look at these ideas, you have to believe that nobody comes into your business to do a bad job. This is absolutely critical. If you want to be an employer of choice, you're just going to have to like people. There's no other way around it. It's about respect. It's about believing that people have potential. It's about believing that people have strengths. It's about believing that people can change. And it's about believing that somebody comes to your business not to be an idiot, not to damage it, but to make a good impression. What we find in all businesses, we hear conversations like, but they were so good when they came first. They were so enthusiastic. They showed so much spirit. And here they are, they barely rock in the door on time. Well, that's really a clear indicator that there's something chronic within the business itself, because people don't go out of their way to be bad. They want to make a good impression. If you think of it as simply as this, employees are children who want a pat on their head by their parents, the employer being the parent. So it's really as simple as that. You're setting up a system that allows your staff to do as well as possible, and you believe that they can contribute to your business, rather than thinking, here's the, oh God, staff, they're a waste of time, they're negative, I don't enjoy being around them. If that's your mindset, you are going to struggle being an employer, and you are highly unlikely to get to an employer of choice status. But if that's your mindset and you're building scale, maybe you allow somebody else to be the manager that facilitates people and you get on with what you're getting on with. But be very, very clear, understand carefully that liking people is an absolute prerequisite to being an employer of choice. And you can learn to like people by deciding to see the best in them. So rather than looking at somebody and listing all their negatives, actually, we often talk about gratitude, so positive psychology, what's good about somebody, what you admire about that person, and really looking, because everybody has a role somewhere, it's about trying to find the best in somebody. So business awareness, we spoke about that already. It's about understanding that planner. So how does your year break down? What's coming up? What you expect? What are you anticipating? It's where you want to slot that person in, who they'll be reporting to. That's very important. That's sorry, I've skipped on. That's the organizational structure. So who is that person going to report to? What's the kind of information they're going to give? Are they going to be part of the decision making or not? You know, you're being very clear so that people have that role clarity. And again, we come back to a lack of role clarity is the leading cause of job dissatisfaction. And inherent in role clarity is timing. And look, I would say, luckily for you in Australia, you've got strict employment law. That's brilliant. That means you've no option. You can't abuse it because you will get caught. So working with what you have. So if you can think of a football pitch, you can be as imaginative as you want inside the pitch or inside a rugby pitch, but the minute the ball goes out, it's dead. The play stops. So be very clear about what the pitch lines are. Be very clear about what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, and then you can have imagination within the playing field. Here's the job description. Okay, thank you. Here's the job description versus job specification. This is often misunderstood. So a job description is what you expect people to do. A job specification is what you need people to have in order to do that. So a job and not having certain things in a job specification can be a deal breaker. So a typical example would be, well, I've got a multiple unit operation, and so I need you to be able to travel between them, but you don't have a driver's license. So part of the job specification would be must have a full driver's license, must have an in-date driver's license, must have the correct driver's license to pull that, to use that machinery. That's a job specification, what you expect them to have. Now, if you expect somebody to have prior dairy experience, you've got to be able to clarify that. That's a job specification. So the job description and be very clear about the job specification. We often forget that what is needed what you need that employee to have. A lot of people say good attitude and willing to learn. Okay, so that's kind of a catch-all one. But there are certain aspects of the job that you will want them to have. So I need you to have hoof trimming experience. I need you to be computer literate. I need you to have Excel skills. Whatever it is that you need, that's the specification. The job description, and this is really important, and I would see this a lot in Ireland. We've got the Irish Farmers Journal, and if the person reading the Farmers Journal is a farmer, so when you say you have a unit manager, you will be milking cows, you will be measuring grass, you will be doing X, Y, Z. I know that. I'm a farmer. I read the Farmers Journal, and every other person is saying that. So what can you tempt me with? What can you add in addition to the job description? What is it about my business that sets me apart from others? That's important when you're advertising the job to farm background. So to people's job specification, you want to attract somebody who has farming experience, dairy experience. They know what you do. So you've got to tempt them with something different. What is it that what extra value can you add when you're writing that job description in terms of advertising? So in terms of advertising, this is the job description, of course, the contract. And then we've got rosters. It's putting things in place, giving people loads of opportunity to inform the system whether or where so that you have got a robust system in place to manage that gap. It's not about rocking up the day before. And again, this probably isn't as obvious. It probably doesn't concern you as much because you've got employment law that would be stricter around those things. But, allowing people good opportunity to know when they're on, when they're not on, really, really important because that's inherent in role clarity. People can gauge themselves. And I'd often say about, people need to know how much energy is morning. They need to know what their energy expenditure will be during the day. Because if I give 100% to the first task and it's the easiest task of the day, well, I haven't much to give the rest of the day. So I need to be able to pace myself. And part of that is role clarity. What is expected of me today? Can I get my head in gear for that? Can I be psychologically prepared for that so that I'm able to physically engage with that idea? And then we've got lots of the simple things like standard operation procedures. Standard operation procedures, it's really important that you do not consider them as removing autonomy from the system. What they're doing, a standard operation procedure is like a memory, it's like a brain. So it's literally you are leaving in your absence, business can continue without you. That's literally what a standard operation procedure is. It's the ability for work to continue in the absence of a significant person. So I mentioned earlier, you should be able to get somebody off the side of the road who could follow a logical standard operation procedure. You would never allow this, but you should be able to get somebody who's never milked before to get to a point where they could put cups in a cow. because you've it so clearly written out. So standard operating procedures, they should be straightforward. They should hit, when you're training and bringing somebody along, you've got to hit hearing, you've got to explain it, you've got to give them the opportunity to try it, and you should have loads of visual aids. So you should have photos, you should have videos, you should have things tagged, you should have them clearly marked. You should be making, and I spoke earlier about having the snakes and ladders, a visual representation of employment. When people can visualize what they're trying to do, it's the same with the planner, the discounted planner, coloring it on a piece of paper, people can visualize time. When they can visualize what they're trying to achieve, it makes it much easier for them to achieve it. So the standard operating procedures create a huge amount of role clarity. When you do standard operating procedures really, really well, say you haven't done them for a long time, it can often be that by removing redundant behavior and streamlining processes, you mightn't actually need another employee. You just get rid of things that you shouldn't have been doing in the first place that were taking up time. So standard operating procedures, and of course your system changes, so your standard operating procedures should change. They are live documents, they're not static. I had an example, a California milk test for looking at mastitis. In the UK, they had one written for a particular type of bottle, and they got a new bottle that in no way, with new reagent, and the way they were doing it was actually a different process. So it had the same outcome, it was a different process, but they had the old standard operating procedure. So you need to be timely with your standard operating procedures, make sure that they are relevant to the business that you are currently in. Reviewing them is, have I written this properly? Have I written it well? Is there room for interpretation? And if there's room for interpretation, you run the risk of misunderstanding. And the difference between understanding and misunderstanding and not understanding, if I do not understand, I cannot act. If I misunderstand, I will act and do the wrong thing. And misunderstanding is much more costly to your business. So standard operating procedures should be clean, written, creating clarity, and you're putting that really big basis to your pyramid where there is structure in place and that you feel people know where they stand, creating a huge amount of role clarity. When you can create role clarity, when you have timely selection, you are far more likely to create an experience for every person who comes through your business that is positive. And you are far more likely to increase, you're dramatically increasing the possibility that people will stay and not just churn through your business. So it's very important to think about role clarity. And when you get that role clarity, you're then going to fulfill those promises that you've made. So this is the job I expect you to do. Allow the person to do it. These are the hours you'll be working. Let the person work those hours, no more, unless they choose to, but be very strict about that, because then that could contravene employment law. So creating as much clarity on something that is totally controllable is going to create a really large basis for that pyramid and allow you to move quite dramatically towards employer of choice status. So as we review what we've spoken about, understand why you're employing. It shouldn't be a flippant comment like, I just need somebody to come and work for me. I need an employee. Understand what you need, very clearly what you need that employee for. That's going to make accountability, which we look at in the next session, much easier. If I know why this person is here, I'm going to hold them accountable for it. If I know why this person is here, I'm going to be disciplined to make sure that that happens. I'm not going to go and do the job I've hired them to do. I'm not going to go and cut the lawn when I should be in the office doing the bookwork because that's what I've hired people here to do that job for me so that I can do what I'm supposed to do. Really important you understand what you have bought from your employee. Then we're going to look at controlling, so that before employment, that those basics is really important that you understand that you can control a huge amount of being an employer that will prevent later problems. Getting a really good first impression, really loading the front end of the employment is going to really make a big impact across the employment lifetime between you and your employee. Timely selection is critical. There you're exposing your business if you don't do that. You're taking what you get rather than what you want. It's really important that you're looking for opportunities to bring in staff so that they can learn well, they can engage with staff, that they enjoy it. And they're not thinking, dear God, what if I let myself in for? I don't think I'll show up tomorrow. And then finally, we need to look at that role clarity, putting as much structure in place that allows you to deliver on your promise, because you have set it out so clearly, you know who you're going to select, and you can slot them in really well. And you're not even consciously thinking about delivering on your promises, because you've already created a structure that allows you to do that. So controlling the controllable, there's a huge amount of employment. It's not a black art, it's not black magic. Employment has a lot of controllables that you can actively intervene. Walking away from today, I would strongly suggest you review your standard operating procedures. You reflect on what all of your employees contribute to your business and why you hired them in the first place. You ask yourself, am I allowing them to do what I hired them to do? You reflect on the employees who did not last any length with you and say, what was it about me that prevented that employee staying? Oh yeah, I didn't have their contracts properly in place. I didn't do X, Y, Z. You know, be self-critical about what your system has allowed and hasn't allowed. If you're doing this well, really well done. Can you tweak it? Can you make it better? When did you last review your standard operating procedures? Really just a fine-tooth comb going through your business to make sure that the bottom of that pyramid is robust and strong and giving you every opportunity to be a good employer and to facilitate good employees. And through all of this, it's really just deciding that you're going to like people, value them, and believe the best in them, rather than expecting people are coming in to damage your business or to take. Because when you get that alignment about understanding what your employee wants and what you can do for them, then it's not about taking, it's about give and take, and it's a very strong, robust relationship. So hopefully that made sense in terms of putting that together. We will refer to many of those things as we go through the next couple of weeks, and I'll be absolutely delighted to take any questions. I will provide a fact sheet as I did for the previous seminar, previous webinar. So please, you know, I'm sure Bernie will have a good question to start me off and to challenge my thinking.
Thanks very much, Nollaig. You hardly drew breath during that. It was a wealth of information that you've presented. It was really fantastic. I'll welcome any questions that people might have if they want to write them or take themselves off mute and ask the question in front of everybody. If you do write the question, I won't mention your name. I'll just read the question out. But I suppose to kick it off, Nollaig, you mentioned a little bit about one of the challenges that the farmers have is attracting the right person into the business, and sometimes they obviously feel that the pool of people to access is quite challenging. What do you think they might do differently? You mentioned there about the position description. You can talk about that when you advertise for somebody, but what do you find some of the more successful people who, you know, what did they do to get themselves to a point where they actually had the right team?
So, you know, critically, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time for people to understand what, you know, who they work best with. So a lot of it is trial and error, and that hurts when you're in that, because you think, gosh, will I hold on to anybody? But what you will find that as time goes on, you start keeping the right people, you start understanding who suits your system, and of course, different people suit different systems. It's, you know, I had a farmer speaking at one of the courses I was doing, and he said, oh, you know, after 14 years, I'm an overnight success. Now, 14 years is actually quite good. That's a scary thing to say now, but it is quite good. It's an ongoing routine, and you're working on it ongoing. And if you think of your current business, you didn't get to the scale you're at. You didn't get to the herd profile that you have. You didn't get to the return that you're currently getting overnight. You worked on that. And what we find, I mentioned it earlier, about robust businesses tend to build people capacity. You know, highly effective businesses build people capacity before they build business capacity. That's a really difficult thing to get your head around, because employment would be employing people is a large overhead of the business. So it hurts people to think about it and say, well, no, I can't just have somebody for the sake. I can't hold somebody in case the opportunity comes up. But actually, highly effective businesses do that. So firstly, highly effective businesses, when you say to yourself, well, my location is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, good businesses turn around and say, well, there's the reality. I can't pick my farm up and move it beside Melbourne. Probably wouldn't want to at the moment with COVID. But, you know, you can't pick your farm up and move it somewhere. The fact is, you are in a rural area. You know, you have to work with those facts. There's no point in railing against them. That's only going to make you depressed and frustrated, and that will come out to your employees. So really, you've got to say, well, what are my limitations and how can I compensate for that? So if you live in a rural area, what are you going to do? Well, I can provide accommodation, I can provide a car, I can provide things that will offset that idea, or I can turn around and say, but there's great glory in, I see Melva Tyson has logged in today, and I was speaking in a couple of sessions in Australia, and she started off the sessions and said, I get to see the blue sky. You know, so it's being able to sell the perks of your business. Now, what we find in farming, and I see this, I hear this all the time in Ireland, for every positive I might throw up about farming, there'll be 10 negatives coming from farmers themselves. So the best ambassadors for farming are farmers, and they're the ones who are most critical about it. So that's really about the industry wanting to sell itself positively. the industry having role models that say, we are a great employer, we are people you want to work for, rather than saying, oh, who does he think he is? Why does he have all the good employees? Actually, you know, if you know a good employer, go and speak to them, ask them, what are you doing? What are you doing well? Of course, that's a risk. It's easier to do that at the other side of the country. So that might be a strategy, saying, I can't go to my neighbour because that could be seen as poaching, but what can you find out? And it's about understanding what your limitations are, and also challenging your notions of employment. So as farmers, we see it, you're there all your life. That's, for many farmers, that's all they've ever done. So they expect when an employee comes into them that they will stay there for life. In reality, why do you need a full-time employee? Why couldn't you have 3 part-time employees? You know, it's about challenging what would work in your system. Of course, if you've got 3 people, you've got to be more organized, you've got to have a good handover, you know, you've got to manage that. But there's a farmer, one of the groups I was at in West Cork, saying, you know, I was actually so exposed by having 1 full-time employee. And he said he'd prefer, his words were, I would prefer to pay, I think he said, I prefer to pay 100,000 for 3 part-times, then I think he said 50,000 for 2 or something, I can't remember, but he had a very specific mathematical equation of what he believed was worth risk for his business. So stepping back and asking yourself, what risks are you willing to take? How can you reimagine your business? And often you can't do that because you're stuck in the business. So it's going to your employees and saying, why are you still here? You've been here for 10 years. What is it about it? Well, it's close to home. Okay, so your best candidate pool is local. Ultimately, your best candidate pool is local. So how are you selling that? Are you tapping into that local market? I had a guy recently in a group in England, and he said for years and years he'd been advertising on Facebook, got nothing. Because of course his friends, the people who are friends with him on Facebook, are also farmers. But what he did was he put a notice board on the local hall and got 20 applications in the first day, because he kept it local. So it's just reimagining how you're going to do it, not assuming that you're going to have a huge amount of traffic through, but looking at who's available to you and what they could do. You would see, for example, in Ireland, you would find, you know, construction doesn't happen in winter because it's too wet, but that means there's a lot of people with skill sets that are redundant during winter. So we'd hear about farmers bringing in a guy who's brilliant with the front loader because he works on the construction site. So he's got very good machinery skills, and he's helping the farmer during winter, during feeding. So just challenging your assumptions of what employee looks like. And if you decide that there's no good employees out there, you will find no good employees. So I think one of the first times, actually the first time Bernie Baxter heard me speak, I was having a bit of a rant about saying, you know, it's not that there are no good employees, it's that there's a lack of good employers. If you are a good employer, regardless of your location, you will have employees. You will have good employees asking to work for you. So it's about creating a system that takes time, doesn't happen overnight, but the starting point is liking people and believing that people want to contribute positively to your business.
It's always a challenge. We find in industry to get farmers to put their hand up and say, hey, we're doing really well. Because there are a lot of farmers out there that are doing really well, but there's a bit of a tall poppy out there and they just want to keep below the radar. The negative ones I don't mind standing out though, but yeah, there are a lot of positive farmers out there. Kylie, what about 3 or 4 questions there?
Yeah, I had a question and then we had one come to everyone. Nollaig, should we consider seeking to employ in advance for a term contract, then look at renewing the term of employment at completion?
Can you just repeat that for me, please, Kylie, so I get that correct?
Yeah. Should we consider seeking to employ in advance for a term contract, then look at renewing the term of employment at completion?
You should always, you know, if you're preempting that you have a gap, I think I understand your question. So you can correct me if this isn't what you meant. So you're talking about knowing that there's a term of work, there's an area of, there's a piece of work coming up, and should you be employed, you should always in advance. You should always be looking for the right person. And it's only when you're at that really good status that you can just say, you can just take anybody off the street, really, because the person who comes into you off the street is actually knows who you are and wants to work for you. So you should think in advance. You should also let them know at the beginning that there is the possibility to renew contract at the end of that contract. You know, not just springing at them on the last minute, because if you're not giving them an indication that you're willing to keep them, they're going to look elsewhere. Now, what I hear a lot, and this comes to that, where we are at the moment is you need to let employees know that you love them and you value them, because they can work anywhere. So why would they work for you? Now, what is dramatically, I do like Bernie's comment about the complainers are willing to stand up and the good people aren't so willing. You know, farming has a huge amount to offer in terms of creating relationship, creating an opportunity to belong to something, to contribute to something. But if in the term of my contract, you don't look in any way like you're going to repeat my contract, I'm going to be looking elsewhere. So you need to let people know fairly timely, you know, starting off the beginning, say, look, this is the term of contract, but if our relationship, and you're allowed to say this, if this works out well, I would, you know, I'm certainly open to renewing that contract so that that person isn't straight away looking outside the farm gate. So allowing people to know what options are there, and then also very clearly understanding your tolerances. So if somebody says, I want to renew my contract and you do not want them to, it's being able to say, because they're not good enough for your business or they're not the right person, it's being able to say, this is where you are and this is where you need to be, and I haven't the time to facilitate that. You know, with this business having time to facilitate that growth.
We're 5 minutes over. We've got a couple of questions here to get through.
Yeah.
Nollaig, if I ask you these questions and you give succinct answers to them.
Good luck, Bernie.
I know. Okay, so is it okay to spell out the career progression? This is one you just read, Kylie? No? The career progression opportunity in your business when advertising a position, or wait until the employee shows a potential? Is it okay to spell out?
No, spell it out from the beginning. Create role clarity. Allow the person to know what's available to them and allow them to jump the hoops, rather than afterwards saying you didn't jump the hoops and they're saying, well, I didn't know there were hoops to jump through. So, you know, spell it out at the beginning, show what's available. And that comes back to organizational structure. I spoke about having clear structures in place. What is available to people? Give them something to aspire to. You know, if you think of a sports team, you're talking about what if you're good enough to be on the team, this is what's going to happen. This is what we're going to do across the year. These are the matches we're going to play. This is where we're trying to get to. Give people the opportunity to expend their energy appropriately. It's the same as the porridge. So by all means, let the people know in your business. So they also have the opportunity to opt out and go, God, no, I've no ambition for that. That's not me at all. Allowing them the opportunity to remove themselves as well. There's one there from John Bush here, is it?
Yeah.
Over time, some of our employees change their aim so that someone who has been great in the dairy is now wanting to do more in other areas of the farm. But milking the cows is what needs to be done. How can we refocus them? What a brilliant question. So this is somebody who's doing well and they have ambition and they want to move forward, and you don't have that position. You don't have the vacuum for them to step into. That is a reality of farming, and farming's quite straightforward, and it can inhibit ambition, which is a problem. So it's maybe looking at, it's having imagination about how that person can refocus in terms of acquiring skills. It could be saying, well, there isn't another step for you to move into, but we have progression opportunity in terms of lateral development of skills. So, you know, you're good at milking cows, but here are other skills that you could do. So it could be sending them on different courses, maybe AI courses, different areas that will help them to stay engaged. But ultimately, if there isn't any opportunity for them within an acceptable time, they will want to remove themselves. And you should do that gracefully, no matter how good they are. So it's about setting out the track on what tracks do you have, and that's a previous question that Kylie asked. You know, what is the career progression? What is the structure? What are the opportunities for the people in your business? And the ambitious person is really, actually, we can find plenty of ambitious people. The very difficult person to find in dairy is the person who's willing to do the monotony of milking cows. That's actually one of the most difficult people to find. And when you become an employer of choice, you're far more likely to attract ambitious people who want to be unit managers. So that becomes the conundrum then. When you move into being an employer of choice, you get a different set of problems. So it's seeing what's out there. So, you know, but milking the cows is what they need to be done. How can we refocus them? So maybe it's challenging them to have better quality of milk. Maybe it's challenging them to efficiently improve the time it's taking to, you know, setting slightly different standards, incremental improvements, not big jumps, but saying we're at this standard of milk quality. Can we squeeze better milk quality? Where the machine is running for this length of time, is there any way we can shorten that without cutting corners? But sit down and have that conversation. And if your business genuinely at that point does not have the opportunity for them to progress into something else, you need to tell them. because otherwise they're going to get bored and they could become very disruptive. So tell them what's available and say, you know, if they say, look, I want something more than this, it's actually being able to say, well, in the future, when that opportunity arises, we contact you. And it will be heartbreaking if you've got a good person, but it's better to allow somebody to go gracefully than to change your structures, change your core value to hold on to that person when really you haven't any opportunity to give them.
Thank you, Nollaig. Excellent presentation, very thorough once again. And thanks everybody else for joining in. I hope you really enjoyed and got a lot out of the session. If you could please populate the link that I have in the chat there as well, which is a review of what you thought of today's session. That'd be much appreciated. So thanks once again. We're back in 2 weeks' time for our next session, which is on accountability. And we will send through the recording of this session on Friday as well with the future invitation for those. So thanks very much, everybody, for joining. See you next time.